Welcome. This is Friday's edition of Between the Headlines with me, your host, Amina Taylor. And as always, we broadcast live from our London studios. Joining me for a peek behind the paper's headline tonight. On my right, Ian Dale. He's the publisher of Total Politics magazine. And alongside him, Claudia Webbe, former advisor to Ken Livingstone, whilst he was the mayor of London. Well, tonight's talking points. Ding ding, it was the clash of the self-proclaimed Alaskan outsider against the veteran Senator Joe Biden. Well, with expectations high, Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin squared off against her Democratic counterpart. If the lack of fireworks and gas proved somewhat anticlimactic, then who came away with the thinnest of edges? Would either of the presidential candidates be more satisfied with the performance of their VP choice? Well, the press verdict is in, and so we hope will be that of our panelists on tonight's show. And he was the top cop, ultimately responsible for the disastrous operation that cost an innocent Brazilian his life when he was mistaken for a terror suspect. Today, the chief of London's Metropolitan Police faces life outside of employment after being ousted from his position. In what the papers are calling a coup by the new Conservative mayor, has party politics won the day? And what now for the future of one of the world's most multicultural cities? As usual, we welcome views on all of tonight's proceeding. If you've got something to get off your chest, we want to hear about it. Contact us via the text message service. That number for you, +44 78 0000 8086. Now let's see what's making the headlines. And of course, there is very little in the way of avoiding this story. If you're in the UK, at least, the Times, they go with Met Police chief is ousted in a Tory coup. And then on the front page of the International Herald Tribune, they go with the critical vote there in the lower House of Representatives with 36 critical hours, playing it out in places most people can't see. The credit crisis was driven by fear, not greed, and shook the financial world to its core. But the story we're going to start off with on tonight's program, some of the press reviews aren't actually in the hard copy versions of the newspapers, but the London Evening Standard, they've gone with one of the very first reports on how they saw last night's vital vice presidential debate. And it's with page 3 on today's Evening Standard. And it says, a wink, and Sarah's a winner. She does well in the big debate, but comes up short on foreign affairs. Ian, were expectations so low? We thought if she didn't put her foot in her mouth, it would be great.
Well, there was a bit of that. She didn't put her foot in her mouth. It has to be said that she didn't display a huge knowledge of foreign affairs, but she displayed probably more than most of us were expecting after the disastrous interviews that she did with Katie Couric on CBS earlier in the week. So, I mean, I watched the whole thing. I stayed up till, what was it, 3:30 in the morning.
Power to you, good sir.
Thank you very much. And I was sort of, it was one of those occasions where you were sitting there, or in my case lying there in bed, sort of almost willing her to do well, because you kind of felt sorry for her. Now, you shouldn't feel that way about a vice presidential candidate, really. And she did do quite well. There were a few occasions when you were sort of buttock clenching moment when you thought, oh God, I don't know where you're going with this answer. But generally, she did okay. And I thought Joe Biden came across as very knowledgeable, very substantial, but very wooden. And he spent far too much time talking about John McCain. I'd love someone to count up the number of times he mentioned John McCain. Well, that's not what inspires people to vote. They want to hear about your ideas, what you're going to do. And I just thought for that reason, she slightly edged it.
Claudia, how did you see it?
Well, I think she came across as better than expected. I think the media anticipation that was hyped up about her really made us think, what would she be up for this? And I think she came across and demonstrated that perhaps she was up for it. She certainly kept talking, and she was able to talk a good talk. And I think that that's what, to some people, impressed. but I could see that very clearly, that she introduced slang, American slang albeit, and maybe that resonated with some Americans, but I imagine that the middle upper classes might have wondered about that. Certainly Biden came across as very knowledgeable, sometimes quite sincere. He hasn't got the razzmatazz effect, but he certainly demonstrated experience, and on foreign affairs he was very clear and very focused. There were some issues I couldn't quite work out whether they were in agreement on the issue of gay rights and gay marriages, for example, or on disagreements. I think one of Sarah Palin's low point is when she said that she's only been in the job 6 weeks. Well, that, I don't think, instills confidence, and probably she resorted to that as a moment of weakness.
Ian, with this though, before you get to what I'm sure is going to be a cracking point, the idea here that these people represent the big name on the ticket, so to speak. She's representing McCain, he's representing Obama, and that's what people want to hear. They want to hear, what can your boss do for us? As opposed to, well, some would say, the lesser business of the VPs duking it out.
Well, in a way, they're going to hear that over the next couple of weeks, because there are 2 more presidential debates. And that's the interesting thing about this, in that they spent far too much time talking about their sort of the other half of the ticket, in a way. I think we all wanted to know a bit more about what their thoughts were, what they were going to do. And the interesting thing, I thought, was one of the final questions that was put to them. Well, what if the terrible thing happened and Barack Obama or John McCain died in office? How would your presidency differ from theirs? And I thought Joe Biden did give the better answer to that question, and I'm not sure it's one that Sarah Palin was really prepared for, because she'd clearly been briefed quite well on some of the other issues. So I think it was, in a way, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I think your point about what would the middle and upper classes like, the way she used slang, is an interesting one. But think of the number of votes that are in that sector of society compared to the rest. And I think that...
But do you get votes from these debates? That's one of the crucial questions when it all settles.
I mean, I am a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. Every single presidential election before this, I would have automatically voted for the Republican candidate. I haven't decided, I mean, I don't have a vote, but I haven't decided yet who I would vote for if I did have a vote. Now, you might think, well, so what? Who cares? But, I mean, I write a quite popular blog, and my blog readers are sort of every day saying, well, have you decided yet who you're going to vote for? And at some point, I'm going to have to come down one side or the other. And I'm watching these debates because I'm using them in a way to make my own decision. But for the first time in my lifetime, I could conceive of supporting a Democratic candidate.
Which would be, you know, for a lot of people almost unheard of, Claudia. But when we read some of what the papers are saying, and they go with, well, Biden gets it on substance, Palin gets it on style. Is that how we end up voting in the end, if we're a kind of style over substance or substance over style kind of person?
Well, I think to some extent politics has come down to that, because of we can't underestimate the sort of the global media and the way in which politics is now played out on the blogs and on the internet and the debates, and actually you know, it's those mediums that often, you know, are always first to get something out, because here you are today looking at what the Evening Standard are producing. The rest of the mainstream media, if you like, are having to wait till tomorrow to catch up, in other words, and yet the blogs and the internet, their opinions are out there, and so you know, they're already forming, if you like, opinions for the general public, in terms of, but generally speaking, the whole concept of style. This is the first time actually we've had a vice presidential election or debate that has actually stirred significant interest.
Yes, some would say Lieberman versus Cheney wasn't exactly the highlight.
I agree with that. Remember Dan Quayle? I mean, his debates were quite interesting.
For all the wrong reasons, some might say.
Indeed.
And a quick look to page 4 of today's Guardian, just as an add-on to this story. You're never quite aware when a diplomat puts his foot in it, but boy, those little private notes come back to bite you, because in here it says, aloof but a star, British envoy on Obama. Leaked letter reveals frank assessment of the Democrat and its further embarrassment for the UK government. Very quickly on this, Ian, I mean, should you even put pen to paper on these matters and then wonder why it's leaked and there's embarrassment all round?
Well, of course you should. He's a British ambassador. It's his job. That's what he does. He tells the British Prime Minister his view of what the presidential candidates are going to be like. That's his job, to advise the British government. Now, the fact that this has leaked doesn't mean to say that it's the wrong thing to do. I think what you have to do is think, well, how has this leaked? Why has it leaked? And I'm told that Sir Nigel Sheinwald, our ambassador in Washington, is a very unpopular man in the corridors of power in Whitehall, and indeed among staff in the British Embassy. So I suspect it's somebody who he's crossed in a previous life, or maybe even in the British Embassy, who's decided to get their own back. Having said that, the memo is very complimentary about Barack Obama. Obviously the papers have picked out the one or two things where he's questioning his experience and one or two other things. But generally, I mean, it's very laudatory about him, so I don't really see this as something that's going to damage American-British relations.
You share that view, Claudia, very quickly?
Well, I certainly share the view about the notion of the matter being leaked. I mean, clearly it's leaked for a purpose, and it's leaked to. But what it does highlight is the mindset of how people think of others, and how you are seen in the eyes of others, and actually who's actually influencing decisions. And when you get this sort of picture where Obama's been presented on the one hand as being of star quality, yet inexperienced, he's intelligent, judged by whom, yet inexperienced, and a number of other things that contradict itself throughout this whole memo, and also commenting about whether or not he's too liberal or not, and things like that, and also commenting on the issues of, for example, where one thinks Obama's likely to be on the issue of Iran, on the issue of Iraq, what he shares with the Prime Minister, and so on. But what this really throws up for the Labour government, of course, is the notion that the notion of neutrality.
And yes, whether, can you actually keep it neutral?
Yeah, and whether or not Brown can actually, I mean, in a sense, the press could make play of this and really try to have a go at Brown for not seemingly being neutral, but clearly.
Well, it's got nothing to do with Brown. I mean, this is a memo from Sheinwald to Brown giving his views on what Obama's like.
It isn't, and that's obviously before he arrived in the country as well. Well, guys, +44 78 0000 8086, and we crack on with this intriguing story. Mention it at the top of the show, and it's today's time. Met Police Chief is ousted in a Tory coup. Et tu, Brute, Ian?
Well, it's not a Tory coup. If it was a Tory coup, Boris Johnson, the London mayor, would have sacked Sir Ian Blair.
But effectively didn't say, I cannot work with you.
He said that he didn't have confidence in him. Now, many of us think that Ian Blair should have resigned some time ago over the many issues that he's being investigated over, not least the de Menezes shooting after the 7/7 bombings, because there were clear failures in the system of management that Ian Blair had instituted in the Metropolitan Police. And in the end, if you're the top guy and something goes wrong like that, it may not be directly down to you, but you oversee the system, the buck stops with you, and you have to take responsibility. He didn't take responsibility over that, and there are several other things. He's being investigated at the moment, and we haven't had the result yet, so we mustn't prejudge it, but he's being investigated at the moment over contracts that have been awarded to friends of his. Now, he may well be completely cleared over that, but there are too many things that have built up that have led Boris Johnson to feel that he's not the right man for the job. And I think he's entirely right as a newly elected mayor to express that view, and Ian Blair has taken that on board and decided to go.
Was it death by 1,000 cuts, Claudia? Because in the statement here, Mr. Johnson said, there comes a time in any organisation when it becomes clear it would benefit from new leadership and clarity of purpose. I believe that time is now. Well, isn't it Jackie Smith, the Home Secretary, who should have this call?
Well, certainly that's the way the legislation is at the moment, and clearly Boris Johnson, I think, he doesn't have the power to sack, so in a sense he couldn't sack, but he certainly clearly demonstrated his power. Ian Blair said he needed to have the confidence of both the mayor and the Home Secretary, and once he knew that he didn't have the confidence of the mayor, then he felt that he had no choice. I don't know whatever happened to the saying innocent until proven guilty, but clearly it didn't apply in the case of Ian Blair. Notwithstanding that, of course, yes, there were issues that clouded Ian Blair's whole time in office almost, and the latest of which, of course, is the whole suspension of Tariq Ghaffur, and followed that in terms of Ali Desai. Now, so the whole, even with somebody like Sir Ian Blair in post, who's seen as one of the most liberal commissioners that we've had to date in the whole history, if you like, over 100 years history of this organisation, the issue of institutional racism has remained a problem for the Metropolitan Police Service, and it hasn't gone away with somebody even as liberal.
Let me put this to you though, Ian. With all of these different questions coming up, who's going to want this job? It's a political hot pot.
There are loads of people that will want this job.
You fancy giving it a go?
No, I do not. There are many jobs I would like, but that isn't one of them. But the problem with Ian Blair was that he was a politician, not a policeman. He strutted around the TV studios as if he was a politician. And if he had spent more time on policing rather than public relations stunts, I suspect he wouldn't have got himself into this position. Final
word on this one, Claudia.
I mean, I don't accept that argument. I think that we expect our commissioners, the people that are heading up this is a significant city. The Metropolitan Police Service has a national role as well as a city role, and we never had any problems with Sir John Stevens when he needed to present himself on behalf of the Metropolitan Police Service on our TV screens and so on. But we had a problem with Sir Ian Blair. This was a political move without a doubt, and what we saw was Boris Johnson flexing his muscle. I wonder if he's actually preparing for Prime Minister one day.
Oh, well, too soon
I'm
to
glad
say.
he flexed his muscles. It's about time.
All right, the letters and opinions pages here with the IHT today. That's, of course, the International Herald Tribune. And it's a piece by Nicholas de Christophe, and it's Save the Fat Cats. This, of course, written before the lower house of representatives in the state actually passed through. Second time of asking that Bush-backed $700 billion bailout plan. The crux of the piece here, we know saving the big boys will hurt a lot of people's feelings about who was to blame for this whole big fat mess. But essentially, we're not thinking about them anymore. It's the man on Main Street, as they so clearly keep telling us.
Well, this is an interesting piece because Nicholas Christophe was in Japan at the time when they had a banking crisis in the early 1990s, and the Japanese government didn't do anything about it. And the Japanese economy has suffered hugely because of that since then. And what he's saying is that these bailout packages that are being arranged at the moment may be painful. They may be saving people that we all sort of despise, but actually it's a necessary thing to do for the long-term good of the economy. And it is a difficult argument to swallow. I mean, if you're someone out there who's about to lose your job and you're going to fall on really hard times, and yet you see these so-called fat cats sort of still coining in their big salaries, it's not a pleasant thing. But I'm afraid the capitalist system is not perfect. It never will be. It never has been. And these things happen within a capitalist system. No one's invented anything better yet. So it's a very sort of harsh thing to say, but that's just the way it is. And all we can do is ameliorate the effects.
And until we find out what, if any, strings are attached to this bailout, do you think the markets will perhaps calm and the papers will reflect that, Claudia?
I don't think the markets will calm yet. I think what the bailout enables is there to be not as long a recession as would otherwise be. I mean, what this article is reflecting is that Japan is still suffering. Its shares are still way down, even since the 19th. It's taken a very long time to come out of recession. And that's what this is reflecting. So we are still going to face recession, and we are in recession, and certainly for low-income families, they would argue that they've been in recession 2 years back, and what Middle England are feeling now. The problem is here, of course, is these fat cats. And as this article points out, in a sense, it says, hold your nose and support a bailout. That is
it might whiff, but you've got to go into
right.
it.
You've got to go with it, because at the end of the day, it's going to hurt the everyday people. But you've got to be able to limit the profitability that these fat cats, what they're actually making. It's actually ordinary people that are paying for their tax subsidies. Why are these people getting tax subsidies in the first place? We need to stamp it out.
All right, final. We've got a couple of seconds on this one. And it's 26, page number, of course, in the Times today. And it's terrorism fears forced the U.S. to move the London embassy. It's one of the largest in the world. And will this make a difference, moving it from fashionable Mayfair to across the river in London, where they can have more security?
Well, anyone that knows the American embassy in London knows that it is very exposed, and the people that live around it, I think, feel exposed. There's been lots of these awful concrete crash barriers up, but you think, well, if the terrorists really wanted to do something there, they probably could. So I think they're going to have a fortress south of the river, which I think will be a great thing, because it is a hideous building, it has to be said. And I cannot believe this article tells us that English Heritage, who are responsible for the upkeep of old buildings, they want to list it. So
I wish they wouldn't.
I mean, it's just a vile building. Let's knock it down and build something that looks really nice.
A little bit, but will it make people feel safer that it's edging up the river a little bit?
I think it probably would do. It'd probably make the staff who work there feel a little safer. It'll be outside the congestion charge zone, so because Ken Livingstone famously called the American ambassador a crook because they refused to pay the congestion charge.
We remember those headlines well. All right, guys, the clock's beating us on tonight's show. My guests, the very eloquent Ian Dale, publisher with Total Politics magazine, and alongside him, Claudia Webbe, former advisor to Ken Livingstone, the Mayor of London. And of course, thank you so much for watching. The repeat of this program goes out at 23:34 and 3:34 GMT. Email your comments to us. It's bth@presstv.co.uk. And back on Monday, Jon Fossgaard will be your guide through the weekend's program. We do hope you'll join him then. A warm good night from all the team.